Okay, where are we gonna find that at later? Yeah, well, I guess we'll find it somewhere.
Probably, I think that's Windows 11 on that box back there, so there'll be a recent list of Windows Explorer.
All right. Excellent. Well, then I tell you what, let's go ahead and start with prayer, and we'll get underway here. Our Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you for the blessing of today, and I thank you for the blessing of coming to be able to discuss church history, to learn, Lord, so that we might be better equipped for the various things that you call us to. And Lord, may we see in the history of your people and your church, Lord, the glory of Christ. May we see people who fought and strove, sometimes just with words, other times literally with weapons, in order to advance, Lord, and defend the truth. God, I pray that you would be with us tonight. I pray that your Spirit would help us through the various things, the little obstacles that we'll find here and there. I pray that you would open our minds, and Lord, as we open your word, I pray that we would be blessed indeed. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Well, church history. You know what, before we get started, I think we have some food out there. So for whoever would like to go grab some food, go get some food. We'll do that. There's pizza and then something else that smelled delicious. I don't know what.
Meatballs.
Was that meatballs? Okay. So let's go ahead and take a few minutes now. And are you guys hungry? You want to go do that? Go ahead and do that. And huh? Yeah, see, that's the benefit of showing up in class and actually being here Thursday. What's that?
Angie and John are getting cooking dinner.
Yeah, they got their dinner there. So, all right, go ahead and grab something. We'll take about 5 minutes to go get that, and then bring it on back in here. We'll eat some food, and then I mean, if you're not ready to do it, we can take a break halfway through. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking it'd be better to get now while it's warm, and we'll dive right in here when everybody gets back. That's what I do. Did you open it up and say, hey, here's the pizza?
The only grain I have for this.
Oh, really? All right, well, good time. Hey, you got it.
Yeah.
Jeez. My pizza is there in the heater.
We started making it spicy. Cool. I'm a fan of cheesesteak. I prefer that chocolate.
I got a garlic sauce. I feel special.
So you're right. Well, I mean, she has garlic sauce. I don't know if she feels special or not.
That's okay, all right.
Well, there's that too.
You said you already got one.
I don't have it, I know, a book, but.
All right.
No, keep it, I'll give it.
I'm not giving it to you for you. I'm going to give it to one of you anyway, because George was asked to talk about the Crusade.
Oh, yeah.
He had a chance to look at the.
That's okay, I'll get that.
Oh, okay, well, he was
No,
asking me, so.
Absolutely.
I figured I have a copy, and I'm looking at it right now. I mean, I'm looking at it right now, but, you know.
Right. Well, okay, everybody online, are you there? We'll see. I don't know. All right, well, so anyway,
Sorry, yes, we're here. We're just eating dinner. I was just,
okay, cool. Yeah,
So
so
we-
in my philosophy class for Ivy Tech, we do a lot, I mean, it's all on Zoom, right? And what, I am a monster when it comes to making my students turn their cameras on so that I can see that I'm talking to people. I dock them participation points if they don't turn their camera on. So, oh yes, absolutely.
Because you don't know if they're even there.
Yeah, well, like, what's crazy is like after class, if I just like let the meeting continue, there'll be like 4 or 5 of them that'll just be on and blank, like the blank ones. And I'll be like, hello, and I'll say their names and nobody answers, it's on there. Like, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Though,
What's
I
that?
was on that one during the meeting.
What's that?
The one time that I did the Old Testament survey in the meeting, but my camera wouldn't work.
Well, that's fine.
Like, yeah.
There's sometimes, it's funny, they do message me, my camera's not working, I'm here, really? Okay, well then talk.
Well, I mean,
We'll see.
I did still participate in the chat, so, yeah.
All right, so, I'm just, you know, this is not a college class, although if you want to, it won't be quite a college level class, but, if you want to, as you'll see, as we talk a little bit about the syllabus, we're gonna set this up as, you know, there's actually extra work that you can do in order to help you through, help learn the stuff, that sort of thing. All right, so, let's see, I want to start tonight, let me just go over some, basic things. And this is just like what I usually call housekeeping stuff. Basically the structure of the course, how it's gonna work and all that. And I didn't have enough paper to print all these off tonight, so I'm just gonna give you guys one per table and then you can take a look at it there.
I suppose I can share a little bit.
Well, you know, you share other stuff with her, I hope. Hello, come on in. So I'll get one per table, there's some things that are gonna change on this anyway, so, and once I get it changed, I will post it. And it looks like I don't even have 5 of them. All right, here we go. I got one for myself. Okay, so if you look at it, you'll notice a few mistakes, of course. What would it be? Would it be mine without typos? And actually the typos on this are, because I copied it from a previous course that I was making, that we have on a different night and stuff like that. So you'll see that it says that the schedule is for Thursdays. It's not for Thursdays, it's for Sundays, so that's what we'll be doing. So basically, I'm just gonna describe the course, and then we have a schedule. There's also an online component. Now, who here has a Google, email? If you, okay.
Gmail.
Yeah, Gmail, right. A Google email, Gmail, yes, absolutely. Because part of this course is actually gonna be on one of the apps that Google has that everybody gets if you have a Gmail. You know, like YouTube is a Google app that everybody gets and this sort of thing. One of the things that Google has that you automatically have is what is an app known as Google Classroom, okay? So, Google Classroom, how about you guys out there in Zoom land? Do you guys have your computers right in front of you? Basically what I will do, if I can get your Google Gmail address, I will send you an invitation to the class. When you click on that invitation, it will automatically add you to the class. And then part of what we'll be doing, what you could be doing if you want, will be actually on that classroom, okay? I'm gonna go to the back of the room and pull that up here so that everybody can see it, okay? And what it looks like, all right? So, that screen where the PowerPoint is being shared to the people who are on Zoom as well. So let me pull that over and I'll show you what it looks like. So I'll be behind you talking, sorry. There we go. So when you pull it up, so let me just show you how to get here. If you just go straight to Google and you're logged in. If you're logged in, it's logged in under the church account right now. If you're logged in, you go to this little 9 dots over here, okay? You click on that and that shows you all the Google apps. You just scroll on down here to where you see Google Classroom and click on that. All right, so this is the class that we'll be having. Yours will probably be blank because unless you're in some other Google class. So when I click on this, this is what comes up. This is the class portal. I don't like where it says stream. Everything that we're going to be using is built on this area where it says classwork here. So you click on classwork over here and you can see tonight, these are things, and this is not finalized. It'll say like class 1, September 1st, homework is read Acts 1 through 14. And then class 2, read Acts 15 through 28. That's the date, and such. Actually, we should probably just say read Acts for this. But you'll notice class 3, 9:15, that's what you'll be reading. And then you'll notice down here, there's a reading quiz. Now, this is something that you can take if you would like to, because, I'm not going to give you a grade and read it in front of the church or anything. I don't know, maybe we'll like put stars on a chart or something and,
Definitely read.
So, but if you want to, the thing about tests and quizzes is, and this is sort of a teacher's secret, right? Quizzes and tests are always used for a learning tool, okay? It's not, so it's, yes, we use it to evaluate progress, but really the good thing about having a quiz every week is that it will give you an opportunity to go over what you've read, what you've learned in class, what we've discussed, and that sort of thing. Does that make sense? So, so that helps with retention. So the quizzes are basically multiple choice and matching, that sort of thing, and they're auto graded. So I'm not going to go and grade your essays or anything like that. And now, if anybody wants to write an essay on something, then I would be more than happy to assign that, and I will read it if you would like to. But yes. The class code, good question. Let me go back here. I'll put it up on the screen. So the class code, usually it's right over here. Yeah, if you guys want to write that code down, it's ZO, not 0, ZOHGIT, the number 4. If you navigate to the classroom, it'll ask you if you have a class code, and you can just enter that and it will automatically populate you in my class. Are you going to do that, Helene?
Yeah.
I'll show you where that's at then. Okay. Did you get it? I think I added myself to the class because I was playing around with the quiz and seeing where it went and all that good stuff. But yeah. So, oh, let me put it back up there for you. Sorry. There you go. Yeah, and that should connect you automatically to the class, and you'll be entered under where it says people and grades. So, so yeah, that is that's how you do that. but yeah, if you go over to where it says classwork and click on that, then you'll find all of the, I've got them set up in modules, although I've got a little bit of editing to do because I'm challenged with editing, so. So it's not finished by any stretch of the imagination, and plus I don't have all the quizzes made out. As with my college classes that I develop, this is the first time around, and so I will be developing this class. And I will be saving this class so that I can offer it at another time when interest, goes. And while we're teaching it, I will probably add stuff to it. Even past classes that I find interesting, like if we're on class number 6 and I find something that's relevant to class number 2, I might go back and add it there. So yeah. Now, once we're up and running a little bit more, when we get to this classwork section, I will also post, and I'll probably put that under class 1. I will go ahead and post the PDF of the final syllabus right there. So there's that. So yeah, you'll see the class schedule. See, I found a typo here. I did 1027 twice, and I just noticed that today. So I'm going to have to go redo some dates there. But each one of these portals will contain the things that you need for that particular week. So as of next week, when you come back, read through the book of Acts this week. Okay, and then we'll have that done by next week. I'll put up a quiz and that will take you through that. And then we can move on after that to Needham's book. Okay. All right, any questions on on Google Classroom here? Let's see if the people who's all been added so far. Oh, so it's just myself and Helene. Okay, there you go. What's that?
Refresh the page.
Refresh it. Okay.
Yeah, combine finding.
Aha, we have a growing class. Look at there. Okay, let's see what everybody's grades are.
Oh, You're at the front of the list next to teacher. Teacher's pad, teacher's pad.
Well, we won't mention that. There's the grades. Oh, look, I got a 30 out of 30. Hey, I got an A on that quiz. Excellent. All right. Anyway, so there's that. There's that. Hey guys, don't bring the average down. Come on, man. I'm just playing. Okay. So okay, that's where Google Classroom is. Now, if you don't have that, or if you
You have to do the code and stuff.
on the phone, okay. Yeah, so if you're gonna do it on the phone, go ahead and use the code. If you're gonna do it on your computer, there'll be a place to do it there as well. You can go ahead and send me your Gmail. Does everybody have my Gmail address? It should be, I believe, on that syllabus that I gave you. I think. Is it there? Yeah, preacherkip@gmail. So here's what I'd love for you to do. If you send me any communique on my email, can you please put in the subject line church history, okay? That way it'll be easy for me to search, okay? So that you've got my email address there, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna send them up to
Okay, any questions on that?
you.
That'll be an easy way to, for you kind of keep track of where we're at and have a good time with that. So, okay, let's see, next topic here. Okay, yeah, any questions on the syllabus? On how to read it or whatever, it's on the line online. Yeah, try to have the book of Acts read by next week, and you don't have to worry about the Needham book just yet. But do have the book of Acts read. Now, why would I have you read the book of Acts? It's the Acts of the Apostles, the beginning of the church, right? We see the beginning of the church in the book of Acts. Specifically in Acts chapter 2, we see that happening. That's where the church is born. Now, I know that if I were to be in front of a group of Presbyterians, that I would get some pushback on that, because they will go back and they'll call Israel the church. Well, Israel was the people of God, and those who were saved out of Old Testament Israel are part of the universal church, perhaps. But the church as an institution on planet Earth began at Pentecost. And that's why I'm having you read the book of Acts. And of course, what you'll see in the book of Acts is just a lot of movement. You'll see some good times, you'll see some bad times. And really, the rest of the New Testament, the epistles, are the apostles' efforts to try to steer the church in those days, right? Obviously, it's the Lord letting us, revealing himself through the apostles and laying down scriptures in the inspired and inerrant word of God. But they're situational. A lot of the epistles are very situational, even though they go deep into doctrine. Thank goodness that they had those situations, amen? Think about that. Think about the church at Corinth, right? We beat up on the church at Corinth. And in many ways, it's sort of warranted. They had a lot of problems in that church. But man, just think, if they hadn't had a church that was full of all those problems, we wouldn't have the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians. And how many of our churches has that steered,
Well, I mean, what do we read almost every Sunday morning here? That's 1 Corinthians 11.
11, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in God in his providence knew what he was doing in the church, even though the churches were, they're filled with sinners, right? They're filled with forgiven sinners, and they do things sloppy and they mess up. But in the providence of God, he has redeemed that. And now we have what we have in the New Testament, these many ages. All right, I want to turn your attention then next to a couple of scripture passages. And this will sort of set the pace or set the tone for us studying church history. And then we'll get into maybe a little bit of a discussion on why church history. All right, so the first passage that I would like for us to look at is Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. There we go. That was on the other page. Matthew chapter 16, and I want to read this little section between verses 13 and 20, and make a few comments on it, okay? Matthew 16, verses 13 to 20, the Word of God says this. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. All right, here we have the very first mention of the church. And Jesus says, "I will build my church. I will build my church." Now, this comes right on the heels of Jesus talking to Simon Peter and his disciples in general. He questions them about who the people say that he is. And of course, the people are always, they always know best, right? That's why we rule by the governing of the majority, because the people always know what's best. Yeah, the people rarely know what's best. It's a very rare thing, because masses can be swayed very easily. Emotions can be manipulated. But the people had an idea about Jesus, and the people said that Jesus, they were talking about Jesus being Elijah. They were talking about Jesus being a prophet. Now, is it true that Jesus is a prophet? Well, of course it is. He spoke prophetically. Every word that he uttered was a prophecy. It was divine revelation. It was absolutely true, inerrant, inspired, because he is God, the Son. So he is definitely a prophet, but he is so much more than just a prophet. There were many prophets. Jesus was far more than a prophet. Jesus was the Word incarnate. He was the voice of the prophets. He was the voice that spoke through the prophets. And so anyway, Jesus is more than a prophet. Jesus is not Elijah. Of course, everybody was hoping that maybe Jesus was Elijah. Why? Yeah, because Elijah was supposed to return before the kingdom came. Now, so Jesus wasn't Elijah. They missed Elijah. Who was Elijah? One who came in the spirit of Elijah was John the Baptist. He prepared the way for Jesus. So he wasn't Elijah. He wasn't just a prophet. Jesus turns around and says, who do you say that I am? So people, they're wrong, or they're only half right. Who do you say that I am? And the answer that Peter gives, of course, Peter's the first one out the gate. He's just right there with the answer. He says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, blessed are you. I will call you Peter. Yeah, a little bit more of that in a second. And on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Now there's a wordplay going on here. Because Peter's name is Simon, right? Simon, that's his given name. His parents gave him that name. It was a good name until he talked to Jesus, and then Jesus renames him. He renames him in the Aramaic as Cephas. In the Greek, it's Petros or Peter. And so here what we have, I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock. Now, Petros or Peter is the Greek word for rock. It's sort of like a rock that you would hold in your hand, okay? A rock that, kids try to throw through the window. Come on. A small rock, a little rock. I call you rock, and on this rock, I will build my church. The second word, rock, is Petra, not Petros. And there's a little bit of a nuance difference there, but in the Greek, the nuance is such that the second mention of the word rock is a boulder. It is something that you stand on, okay? It's not a Petros, it's a Petra. It's a boulder. So it would be like saying, I call you Pebble, and on this rock, I will build my church. But there is a bit of a wordplay there. And what he is showing Peter is that the profession that Peter just made, that he is the Christ, the Son of God, the profession that Peter has just made, that profession of faith is the rock upon which Christ will build his church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. What is the foundation? Foundation is faith. That profession of faith. And how are the people of God identified today? By their profession of faith, by their faith. That is the difference between the Old Testament and the New. You're not born into the people of God. You're not baptized into the people of God as an infant when you're born. You are inaugurated into the people of God. You're welcomed into the people of God when you make a profession of faith and then you submit yourself to the sign of the covenant, which is baptism. We saw that last night. It was a glorious time for those who were there. But it was so that is the foundation upon which Christ is building his church. Foundation is faith, and by the way, faith is a gift of God. But I digress. We're going to get in the weeds there if we go down that way. All right, so notice this. A couple things that Jesus says about his church. Who's building the church? Is it Peter? No, Peter's not building the church. Who's building the church? Jesus. Jesus says, I will build my church. Jesus says, I will build my church. It was funny, just a little bit ago, I went upstairs and they were getting ready to end the service, and so all the kids were in the foyer there. And these kids are just tiny, man. They're probably 6, 7, 8 years old. And I came in there and they looked at me like, whoa. And I went into the office and they were like, why are you going there? Because I guess their parents tell them to stay out of there all the time, I said, well, this is my office. And he says, is this your church? I said, no. They said, who builds this church? And I said, Jesus built this church. Oh, I said, are you talking about the building? They're like, yeah. I said, well, the building, Jesus did help build it. Jesus did inspire a group of men to build that. But yeah, but the funny thing was, I said it was built around 1990, and they were like, 1990? That's a long time ago. I was like, oh, I helped build it. and I was graduating high school, Anyway, that was fun. Yeah. Just, that was the 1900s. So long ago. Oh, that's hilarious. But anyway, where was I? So Jesus is the one that's building his church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Notice he goes on to say a few other things. He says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Notice he says to them, I will give you I will give you, not here they are. He doesn't say it right now. Why not? Because the church is not ready for that just yet. It will be in a few years. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And so we understand that Jesus has given the keys of the kingdom to his church. He hasn't given us the sword by which we lay down the law, right? He hasn't given us that. He's given us the keys of the kingdom. In other words, you and I have the ability to open up the kingdom of heaven to people. How do we do that, by the way? Do we tell them you are forgiven?
Half mile Hitler.
Yeah, we share the gospel. Amen. We share the gospel with people. We proclaim the gospel. We shout it from the mountaintops. Or if our voice is hoarse, we just get amplification because God is good and in the providence of God, we've got lots of that. So, so we proclaim the gospel in the hearing of the people. And Christ uses that in the hearts of some to save them. Others it might harden. Others might ignore it for the moment. It might plant seed. Who knows? But we send forth. So that's one thing we do. And he says, I tell you, what you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Actually, a better translation of that is, I think, what the NASB has. It says, what you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. That actually is the tense of the verb. What you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. In other words, God has the prerogative, but he works through his church to accomplish it on the earth. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's what he's doing. And that is what we do. That gives us a sense of our mission. Our mission is to open the gates of the kingdom of heaven, to bind and to loose, and to declare God's gospel that the kingdom may take root and grow. So that tells us here the very first mention of the church. It tells us something we ought to do. Now, when we see church history, I know we're not talking church history yet. Well, we are. We're in church history, the very beginning, the proto-beginning. But when we see church history, we see the church doing that. And you know what? The church has always been made of sinners who've been forgiven. And so they're never doing it perfectly. They're always messing up. They're always, they're always falling all over themselves. But there's sometimes there are those bright spots where they do get it right. And we see the advance of the gospel throughout the ages. And we see the faithfulness of men and women throughout the ages who have been used of God to accomplish this. All right, so that's one passage I wanted to look at just as sort of a gloss, but another passage I think that tells us something very important about the nature of the church. Is found in 1 Timothy chapter 3. 1 Timothy chapter 3. So if you flip on over there, we'll look at that in a moment. The book of 1 Timothy, as we're going to find out in the passage we're reading right now, was written specifically in order to give instructions from Paul to Timothy about how he should handle the affairs of the church if Paul couldn't come to him right away. You see, Paul was the mentor, and Timothy was the protege, and they were not together. Paul wrote a letter to him and said, hey, look, I plan on coming to you if I can. But if I'm delayed, I'm writing you this letter so that you may know how to behave, how to order the church. So 1 Timothy is a manual on church order. It gives us the non-negotiables, and it gives us areas of freedom as well. But the whole of 1 Timothy is a book on church order. And he says this in chapter 3, verse 14, starting at 14. He says, I hope to come to you soon, but I am writing these things to you so that if I delay, you may know how one ought to behave in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, a pillar and buttress of the truth. I'm going to stop there. This tells us something about the church, about what the church is. We tend to think of the church being a building, or we might even talk, if we're more spiritual, we might talk about the church being the people, right? But rarely do we talk about what is the purpose of the church in the world in which we live. Here, Paul tells us something about that. This is the church of the living God. Now, that word church, it comes from the Greek term ekklesia. Okay, and the term literally means those who are called out. And it referred to a gathering of people. That's what it meant. So yes, church, you might be able to translate it fellowship or gathering, the called out ones. This is why, by the way, back when COVID hit, I refused to do online church. Because while I like Zoom for educational purposes and for, strategizing and talking, the church are the ones who are called together. It implies a gathering. And we are not free to not gather if we are able to do so physically, right? It may be that we're in prison and we can't get together. Okay, I think God's going to give us some grace there, right? But even still, if we don't have those physical barriers, and an unconstitutional command by the governor is not a physical barrier, right? Then we should gather. And that's why we refuse to be shut down, even though we took some measures out in the parking lot. We did parking lot church for a while. That was actually turned out to be very fun because everybody heard the half mile hailer across the street. So that was a good time. But we did that for a while, but after a while, it's like, you know what? This thing is not as bad as what they thought. And the week that we chose to get back together, that's when Holcomb said, okay, you guys can't meet. We were like, well, dang hike, bless you. Anyway, you don't have the authority to tell the church not to meet. You just don't. God has told us to meet. It is the church, it is the gathering. So it is the church of the living God. It is the gathered out, the called out people who are meeting in the name of the living God. Not the dead gods, we got lots of those. Not the demon gods, but the living God. This is the one true and living God. And we are gathered in his name. We are gathered for the purpose of worshiping him. But notice what it says also about the church here, and this is a great thing, something that you and I need to get a fresh understanding of in our time. Okay? The church of Jesus Christ, the church of the living God, is a pillar and buttress of the truth. A pillar and buttress of the truth. Now, we all know what a pillar is, right? We were visiting the Stids yesterday, and they just moved into a new house. And this house is a big house, a really nice one. And you go down the basement, and they have this steel I-beam going through the middle of the house, right? Which holds the house, which is good because they have lots of boys. So you need some reinforcement, right? So they've got this steel I-beam. So when we go back upstairs, though, in the living room, right sort of kind of in the middle of the room, there's this pillar going from the floor to the ceiling. And a couple of kids were like, yeah, let's just take that out of here, and stuff like that. It's like, well, first of all, you probably couldn't unless you had a power tool, but that's holding up the ceiling. That pillar is what is holding up the roof over your head. So you take that out, if you were able to do it, you might get a very quick surprise as the ceiling came down on your head, okay? That's what pillars do, they hold things together, right? They are part of the structure, and they hold things together. They hold the ceiling over our head. Now, this span of the room is not so big that it needs that, but down in the basement, you go to the basement, with the fellowship hall, there are 3 pillars that are very inconveniently placed. You can't get a good classroom setting around those without that pillar being in your way. But we need it, right? We need it so that the floor doesn't collapse into the basement. So, and that would ruin our fellowship, so a little bit. But those pillars are necessary. The pillar is what holds things up. The church is the pillar in this society. It's the pillar of the truth. The church has the charge of maintaining the truth, of holding it up structurally. Now, you know what a buttress is? I know that maybe not, maybe that's not something that you're familiar with. In this particular term, especially now, to buttress something, it means to keep, to reinforce it. In the medieval period, they would build these huge cathedrals, right? And these huge cathedrals would be just like blocks, one right on another, and so on. So you get them a couple 100 feet high, right? So you're building the wall, and the wall gets so high. Now down here it's really stable, but as you get up toward the top, have you ever played Jenga? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. The higher you stack this thing, the more wobbly it gets, right? Well, the same thing is true with these big blocks, except these big blocks weigh a ton apiece or so. They're very heavy. And you don't want to be singing and all of a sudden have them fall on your head, right? So what they would do, is oftentimes, so this is the inside of the building, right? So that's the inside of the building. Oh, my architectural drawings is terrible.
You need some buttresses.
We need some
buttresses, very much.
We need some buttresses. So what they would do is come out here on the outside, and they would build another structure that was made for a support about halfway up. And then they would connect this to this wall so that it gave it stability. That's called a buttress, flying buttress, like you said, right? So that was what would build that. And sometimes they would come and build this up a little bit as well, that sort of thing. But that would give stability to that wall. And those buildings have stood for a millennia. Almost a millennium, but yeah, almost a millennium. Yeah, a long time. And, you know, through rain, through snow, through tornadoes. The church is the support of it. It holds the truth up. If you want to know that that's the case, all you got to do is log on to social media and you will see that the lies of this world fly at light speed, with the speed of a photon. Yeah, literally. Yes, yes, I mean, especially we've got fiber optic, that is a photon moving through there. The lies that this culture promulgates go everywhere. Church, we are pillar and buttress of the truth. And you know what? The weight of lies is getting laid higher and higher on the top of our ceilings. And we are required to be the pillar and buttress of the truth. That's what the church is to be. We are the voice in this culture that says, no, you're wrong. And I don't care how many of you voted that way. It doesn't matter. You're wrong because God said so. And God has the truth. In doing so, we provide that restorative function in this culture. We are a pillar and buttress of the truth. We speak prophetically into this culture. We don't hide in our buildings. We don't hide and just shrink away from conflict just because it makes us uncomfortable. We declare the truth. Now, we declare the truth in love. We don't have to be jerks about it, okay? We don't have to do that. We don't have to intentionally offend someone. We don't have to flick them off.
So they will do that to us.
They will do that to us. Yeah, I've been told I'm number one. I don't know how many times. They must really like us. They get that 20% of a wave going on. Yeah, so you know, we don't have to be like that. What we do need to do is we need to proclaim clearly, unambiguously, loudly the truth. If not, this world won't have it. This world prefers the lie, and because of that, will destroy itself. Well, we go forward with the truth, we proclaim it, and you know what? We let God use that to change hearts and change minds. So that is what we are, the pillar and the buttress of the truth. Without us, this world would quickly fall under the judgment of God, under the immediate judgment of God. Okay. Any questions or comments to that before we move on? No? Okay.
Read down the road.
well, so I'm done with my preaching part. Now we do the teaching part. Okay. So let's move on to the next. And so I'm going to introduce you to the topic of church history. I am certain that you've probably read some church history. You're familiar with some, perhaps with various ages of the church, and so forth. So we're going to start. I was asked today, where are we going to start in terms of this class? Where are we going to begin at? And I said, well, we're going to begin with the pre-apostolic age. Okay. Now, to be sure, we're going to give we're just going to go through some quick context. Okay. And the book, Needham's book, will pick it up after the book of Acts. So so that's why we're reading the book of Acts first, so we can get it from the birth of the church to what they would call the apostolic fathers, and then we will take Needham's book from then on. All right, so let's move. First question: why should we study church history? I got to write these down. Give me a good justification for the class.
You just want general answers.
Yeah, well, I mean, what is interesting? Go ahead, yeah.
Women are curious.
Women are curious. So you're saying the women want to know what's going on back there, right? So are guys. Well, I'm not a woman, so no, I love history. I love history because it gives me a sense of rootedness, you know, having come from somewhere. And I think that in particular, a lot of Protestant churches have lost that. In our day and age of just mass marketing Christianity, we have lost our rootedness with who has gone before. But yeah, it's curious, you know, and yeah, absolutely. What were you gonna say, Jeff? Go ahead.
To learn, so we don't have to relearn or reinvent the wheel. A lot of these lessons go back 2,000 years. They dealt with them.
Yeah.
And so we can learn from them.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, you know, how many of us, you know, teaching a younger person, right? You're like, you give them advice and you're like, trust me on this. I had to learn the hard way. You don't want to have to learn the hard way. You know, we don't want to have to learn, you know, I mean, compared to the church fathers, we're relatively young, you know. They lived a couple thousand years ago. And you're right, it would be much better to learn from history so that we don't have to repeat the same mistakes. And that is, I think the quote's been attributed to various different people. But the old adage that says that those who refuse to learn from history are destined or doomed to repeat its mistakes. And most certainly that is the case. I know,
I
right?
hope that doesn't apply to 2020.
Well, people do have a very short memory nowadays. Well, it's because of the memory hole, right? If you read 1984, they would change history. And so we have the ability to do that with AI and the internet. We have the ability to change history now. Not really, but we do have the ability to change people's access to the
And names.
Yeah. Oh, sure. All right, so why else study church history? Go ahead.
I like what R.C. Sproul said about it a while back with regard to providing a check on doctrinal innovation.
Okay.
He said it this way, like if your position has somehow been missed by the church for 2,000 years, or has been championed by known heretics, odds are you should abandon your interpretation.
Yeah, especially the second thing there, right? No, absolutely. So doctrinal innovation, that means basically making up new stuff. Or when you come to the scripture and you see the text and you're like, oh, I wonder if this text means, and then fill in the blank.
Absolutely no one has ever thought that before.
And nobody's thought it yet. Then you got a little bit of, you're like, okay, you might want to just put the brakes on a little bit, you know? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And that second one.
Well, the second one is most certainly, well, you know, it's like I don't know if anybody has ever heard of the Trail of Blood. Is that what it's
You mean the
called?
Landmark Baptist?
Yes, the Landmarkians. And so Landmark Baptists deny that they were ever had anything to do with Roman Catholic Church. Because as we'll see that, you know, the Protestants of today came out of the Roman Catholic Church and rediscovered the gospel, and made corrections to what the doctrine was back then. They say, no, we never came out of the Roman Catholic Church. We can trace our lineage all the way back to the apostles.
John the Baptist was the first Baptist.
Yeah, John the Baptist was the first Baptist. Well, that's the, you know, often the. Well, the funny thing is,
of course, but
when you, right, well, when you see who they trace their roots to, they go through some heretical groups that we'll talk about. They go through the Montanist group. That was one that Tertullian was part of, and they were heretical. They were just flat out heretical. And it's like, wait a second. You don't believe you were once a heretic and then you rediscovered the truth? That's kind of what we did with the Catholics. So what's the problem here? So anyway, but that's, you know, that's true. If you find something that nobody else has ever said anywhere, or if you find something that people have been definitely determined has been heresy, then yeah, don't go there. Don't go there. Anything else? You know, one of the reasons I love church history is because I see the tenacity of those who faithfully contended for the gospel. We're in the book of Jude now in our morning service, right? Man, the book of Jude is awesome. I just absolutely love the book of Jude. It's a short book. You know, maybe that's why. Maybe it's because I have a short attention span. And but it's packed. It is packed with stuff. I remember Pastor David last week when I was walking out to the car, he says, hey, he says, I'm going to preach on chapter 4 tomorrow next week. And I was like, one verse. Yes. One verse. It was there. but it's just chock full, Jude's admonition for us is to defend the faith. It was once and for all delivered to the saints. Yeah, we have a charge to do that. And when you look down through church history, like for example, one of my favorite ones is the story of Athanasius, which we'll get to in this book, actually. Athanasius contra mundum. Do you know what that means? Contra mundum? Against the world. Because he literally stood at points in his life against everybody. He was hunted. He had to like move from place. He actually went out and spent years in the desert with the desert monks in just to hide so that he wasn't killed. They were hunting him. Athanasius contra mundum, and from Athanasius, because he was such a stalwart defender of the faith, we have the Athanasian Creed. We have biblical orthodoxy handed to us. We have the defeat of the Arians, who were the forebears of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And we have all of the arguments that show us biblically why the Jehovah's Witness position is wrong. Like that was settled for, was it the 3rd, 4th century? I might be off my dates. Or the
1,500 years ago.
Yeah, something like that. It's like, guys, will you just convert? We can just recognize the truth. So anyway, but yeah, a contra mundum against the world. And there are many others as well. That's one of my favorite examples in the book that we'll be reading this time. So yeah, inspiration, man. When you read about these people who defended the faith, it gets you inspiration to get up out of your bed and get out in the streets and share the gospel, and defend the faith, contend for the faith. So anyway, yeah, those are great reasons. I don't know if anybody's going on Jeopardy. I don't know if they ever had any church history on Jeopardy, but it's no fun without Alex anymore, though. So. I'm just kidding. I haven't done Jeopardy in years. I have no idea. All right. So why study church history? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. It also makes sense of where we are today. What in the world is a Baptist? Where did they come from? I mean, why are they here? What is the proper mode of baptism? What is the proper mode of the Lord's table? What is the understanding of the Lord's table? These things have been debated through church history, and we can see the arguments of these people so that we can understand by looking at them what the truth is on these matters. What are what are the natures of Christ and how are they related? How can Christ be both man and God at the same time? Because if Christ is both man and God at the same time, then doesn't Christ's divinity mean that he could have exercised some advantage when he went to the cross? Or if he was, if he is divine and yet takes the human nature, doesn't that water down his divinity so that he is some kind of secondary divine creature? These are all questions that have been dealt with thoroughly in church history. And we can see what the outcome was. Not only the outcome, but we can see the process. A few years ago, it's been quite a few years ago now, there was a novel written by a guy named Dan Brown. You guys remember that? Dan Brown, he wrote a novel called The Da Vinci Code. And I looked for my copy of that in my heretic section, but I couldn't find it.
It was written as a work of fiction.
It was a work of fiction, but when you look at the front of it, he had a little comment that was like one page in, that was just on its own page that said that the historical record has been thoroughly investigated concerning all that is presented here, something to that effect. And that's what set everybody off about Dan Brown's novel. And I read Dan Brown's novel back in the day because I wanted to know what in the world was it all about. Well, what it was all about was Dan Brown had gotten into a lot of Gnostic writings. And he was promoting Gnostic writings as lost books of the Bible. And they're not. They just aren't. And so he's promoting some ideas that like Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and they had a child and all this other stuff because the Gnostics wrote those things. The Gnostics were 2nd and 3rd century. So they weren't even eyewitnesses to anything that Jesus ever did. These are things that they just made up. Gnostics get their name because they have secret knowledge. Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. And you're going to read about the Gnostics in Nick Needham's book. So yeah, anyway, so we can avoid those errors. We can see where they come from. We can see, when Dan Brown came out with this, like people, it was a good novel. It was well written. It was a compelling story as a work of fiction, but people started reading it and then started acting like they knew something special about the Bible. They don't. Those books were not included because by the time the canon was compiled, they weren't even written. So they were not included. Anyway, so there are many reasons to study church history. And we're just interested. All right, church history is also a record of the providence of God throughout time. And I think that is one thing that makes it so compelling to study. All right, well, let's dig in. The first thing I want to do is I want to go and I want us to, this kind of coincides with Needham's first chapter. But we're going to talk about it today so that when you read the book of Acts, you might be able to pick out some things. You'll be able to put it in its context. You know that history is never that nice and cut and dry. It's never clean and tidy. History is always given to us in a context. There are thoughts and movements and actions and wars here that lead to this, that lead to this, that lead to this. The saying is true, that every cause has its effect. Every cause has its effect, and that is absolutely the case with history. And so when we read the book of Acts, I want us to put it in its context. And so let's talk a little bit about the context of the early, of the book of Acts, and then also with much of the early church. And we're going to kind of take it back to the period of the exile. Now, this is from the Hebraic perspective. Does anybody, what is the exile? When I say the period of the exile, I just realized I don't have a way to look at that. Okay, for Randy, that's fine. I can see it. What is the context? Or I'm sorry, what is the exile?
They're in Babylon.
Yeah, it was the exile of Babylon that started in 586 roughly. It goes roughly to 537. Now, I know that those who like to count the days of Daniel and like to put things on a very tight prophetic record, which you can do that, okay? This doesn't really match that. These are just rough dates. The dates that I put here, the dates 586 to 537. 586 is when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem for the last time. Of course, the destruction of Jerusalem, or the sacking of Jerusalem, happened 3 different times by Nebuchadnezzar. And this was the final one. This is the one where the temple was destroyed. So you can get your 70 year, you can get your 70 weeks in there, 70 years for the exile in there between various different points. But I'm counting right here between the actual destruction of Solomon's temple, which happened in 586, to 537 was the year that Cyrus the Great gave the decree for the Jews to return and rebuild. Now they did that in waves, and so we have the book of Nehemiah, we have the book of Ezra, and then we also have the post-exilic prophets in the Old Testament. People like Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi and so forth. So anyway, so you have the period of the exile. Then what you have is this little guy here. So the exile, the Jewish people return, they rebuild, they get things going. Of course, they are under Persian rule at this time. Cyrus the Great is the Persian emperor, right? So they're under Persian rule at this time. And Alexander the Great comes along. Now, does anybody, who can tell me anything about Alexander the Great? And by the way, for you that are on Zoom, please jump right in when you're ready, whenever you want to. Don't worry about raising your hand or anything.
He was young.
He was very young. Yeah,
He conquered the New World time.
sure. He conquered
Oh,
from Greece. What's that? He conquered from Greece all the way down to Africa,
yeah.
Egypt, all the way over to India. So that whole area of the world he conquered. What else do we know about Alexander the Great?
Very important.
He's the eldest.
No, he wasn't beheaded. He was probably poisoned by his own people.
Well,
Probably. So, yeah.
Colonization.
What's that?
Hellenization?
Yeah, so, he was responsible for bringing a single culture to all of that area that he conquered, right? So he goes from Greece, which is the northern Mediterranean world, all the way east. He conquers, Israel all the way down, the whole Fertile Crescent, and he stops in India. And the reason he stops is not because he doesn't want to go fight, he wants to go fight. But the reason he stops is because his army is like, no, we're not going any further. And why weren't they going any further? Well, because as they looked at the army that was coming from India, they had oil accounts. Sam, they had elephants. They had war elephants.
That's not cool.
And you're riding horses into battle against elephants? Yeah, no, that's not a good idea. It's like taking a motorcycle against a tank, you know? You might go faster, maybe, but you're gonna get stepped on and spotted. And they literally, they said, we can't do this. Like they're gonna destroy us. And they turned back. And he was said to have wept. Like Alexander broke down and cried. Well, he goes back to Babylon and tries to he's gonna make the center of his nation or his empire, Babylon. And he gets sick and he dies real quick. So people think that he might have been poisoned. But do you know anything about what he did in terms of succession? Who did he pass the kingdom on to? He had a son. See, he had this ring, right?
Yeah.
And this ring represented his right to rule. It was his scepter. He takes his ring off and his generals are standing around him. And he's on his sickbed and he says, to the strongest, throws it on the floor and dies. That's a great peaceful succession, a great plan for peaceful succession, isn't it? And as you well may suspect, those four generals begin to fight it out. And they take certain areas, and before too long, after a couple centuries, it's actually two kingdoms. We'll get to that in a minute. But the four break down into two as they're absorbed into those two. But a couple other things about Alexander the Great. Who was Alexander the Great's tutor, his teacher? Very well-known guy.
Socrates?
Not quite.
So,
Aristotle was his teacher.
bit of all.
King Philip, the king of Macedon, was Alexander's father. See, Alexander wasn't Greek himself; he was Macedonian, but he loved the Greek culture, and he spoke Greek. And Aristotle, King Philip, called Aristotle to be his son's personal tutor. Now, Aristotle hightailed it out of Athens because they were going to kill him there, and he ended up leaving so that his quote was, so that Athens does not sin again against philosophy. Of course, he's talking about Socrates, right, who was killed by the Athenians. So he hightails it out of Athens to Macedon. He spends years bringing up Alexander, and lo and behold, Alexander conquers the world, right, and spreads Greek culture everywhere. Like the Eastern world at this time, everywhere east of Greece is going to speak Koine Greek as their lingua franca, it's their trade language. They're going to have Greek poetry. They're going to have Greek architecture because of what? Because of Alexander. Yeah, exactly. Libraries and so they all, Greek culture, Greek learning gets spread all over the east of the Mediterranean world. Not so much the west, but the east. So, you know who Aristotle's, by the way, who was Aristotle's teacher? Plato. Who was Plato's teacher? Close. Socrates. So it goes from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle, and then here comes Alexander, says, I'm tired of thinking, I want to go do something. He goes and conquers the world. Yeah, and that just goes to show that a properly educated mind can do lots. Of course, that's a means to an end sort of thing, but whether it's good or bad, they can do it. They can do lots. So that's Alexander. Alexander Hellenizes the Mediterranean world, at least the eastern part and the southern part of the Mediterranean world. And he does that within his lifetime, within just actually a handful of years. Like, how did he even ride there in that time, let alone conquer it all? But he does. Well, he brings it all together, and then he gives it over to his generals. His generals fight it out, and two dynasties become dominant. The Ptolemaic, which ends up being in the north of, so Ptolemy is in the area from Greece all the way over to the very easternmost parts of well, I guess for you, that would be easternmost parts of the empire, all the way down to Israel. And then, I'm sorry, I have them backwards. Did I say the Ptolemy? Ptolemy's south. Ptolemy is Egypt and Israel. Seleucid is the north. Seleucid goes from Greece to what we call Syria, and then meets in Israel. Israel was sort of this buffer zone that they fought over, right? And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And this, by the way, is spoken of in the book of Daniel. Daniel prophesies this hundreds of years before it even happens, but it does happen. And eventually the Seleucids gain control. They gain control of Judea. They actually become a more dominant power, but by this time they've spent so many years fighting each other. Guess what has happened? Rome has gained ascendancy on the Italian peninsula. And they have become very, very strong. And Rome begins to assert its dominance throughout this world. And the Ptolemies and the Seleucids are so weakened from fighting each other that they really don't stand a chance. Well, in the Seleucids, we'll get back to Rome in a minute. The Seleucids, they come down they're going to invade Egypt. And this is under a guy by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. You might remember him from the book of Daniel when we studied through that. So they come down and they're going to invade Egypt, which is where Alexandria, Egypt is where they're centered at, is where the Ptolemies are centered at. Well, unbeknownst to them, Ptolemy has went and talked to Rome, and they struck up a bargain with Rome to come and defend them. And the Roman general meets Antiochus Epiphanes on the battlefield, and he's got a Roman army behind him, which is going to just really wipe the floor with the Seleucids, because Rome was no joke. So they meet on the battlefield, and they meet for their little parley in the middle of the field. And Antiochus says, the Roman general says to Antiochus, he says, look, you need to get your army off the battlefield now, or we're going to destroy you. And Antiochus doesn't want to look bad in front of his army. He's come all this way. And so he says, you know what? He says, well, can I have some time to think about it? And the Roman general hops down off his horse, pulls out his sword, draws a circle in the sand around Antiochus, and says, yes, you can have all the time you want. But as soon as you get out of that circle, you need to give me your answer. He's like, treats it, well, Antiochus is furious, but he can't do anything about it because he'll get destroyed on the battlefield if he tries to fight. So he goes back, and he, like a puppy with the tail between his legs, he goes all the way back through Israel, goes up the coast, and stops at Jerusalem and takes out his wrath in Jerusalem. And he goes in there, and he says, you know what, these Jewish people, we need to teach them a lesson. They're always talking about how we can't do this to their temple, we can't do that to their temple. So what does he do? He goes into the temple, he starts killing everybody. He takes a pig and he sacrifices it on the altar, and he sets up an image of Zeus in the temple. Yeah, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea because the Jews, okay, they may not be strongest army in the world, but they are certainly very, very committed to their religion. And so this inspires what's known as the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabean Revolt, the story of Judas Maccabees. If you have ever read the apocryphal books of first, second, how many books of Maccabees are there? I thought there were 4.
There are only 2 who are apocryphal.
Okay. So 2 of them would be included in a lot of your older. They're included in sort of the back appendices of your Bible. They're not included as actual scripture, but they're included as what you can read for historical edification. So anyway, long story short, the Maccabees used guerrilla tactics to wallop on the Ptolemies. And they cut off supply lines, they just raid things here and there. And after a while, the Ptolemies were like, man, it's costing us too much money to be down there. And so they just leave them alone essentially. And then we're free. So they set up their own little dynasty there. They set up their own new high priest. They set up their own. So there's a period in King, and there is a period of rule that they enjoy called the Hasmonean dynasty. And that lasts for a very short period in history, about 100 years or so. When the Hasmoneans rule. Now the Hasmoneans are not actual descendants, like they're not tracing their genealogies back to establish their right to rule. You know, they're illegitimate rulers at this point. So in terms of their bloodlines and so forth, but they're the ones that have de facto, you know, established themselves there. And so the Romans come in and make contact with them. And at the time that the Romans make contact with them, they're fighting amongst each other. And there's a high priest and a king who are both saying, I'm the head honcho, no, I am, no, I am. Well, Rome comes in and sees this conflict going on. And so Rome basically takes the highest bidder and says, which one of you all will help me beat the other guy up? And Rome comes in and just basically takes over, appoints one of them as the highest leader, and then has them rule Israel as a puppet. And that happens when Roman control of Judea starts at about 63 BC, and then goes on to about 305 AD. So that, of course, is going to encompass most of the time that we're talking about here. So we'll see that. Now, the events of the New Testament fall within this period, with about 6 BC, starting with the prophecy and of John the Baptist and Jesus. Jesus was born in about 4 BC, and then the last book of the New Testament. Now I'm probably gonna make some people upset here, but I believe that the entire New Testament was finished before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Now that is a contended position to take, and I get it. But that's my take on it. If you don't like that, okay, well, for the purposes of this class, you can go ahead and write down 95 AD if you want. But, you know, I believe that all the books of the New Testament were finished prior to the destruction of the temple. So that's a point though that we can argue about later if you want. So that's the historical context and sort of a timeline of leading up to where you'll find yourself when you're reading through the book of Acts, and then as we get into the Nick Needham's book. Now he's going to go a little bit further than this. I think we're about the 6th century, so 5 something AD. So he's going to go a little bit further than that, than 305. But we will be well within our context at that point. So. All right, any questions on any of that? All right, well, we can't leave today without at least once thinking about the Roman Empire.
No.
How often do you think about this? So this happens to be a guy by the name of Augustus. He's the first emperor of the Roman Empire. But we'll learn about him in just a minute. But yeah, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is the political backdrop against which the events of the New Testament take place, and the events of the early church history take place that we'll be reading about. So let's learn a little bit about the Roman Empire. Now this goes back a little bit. This goes back, you know, the timeline we just looked at was focused more on what's going on in reference to the Middle East and the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Oh, by the way, when you get Needham's book, he has a very, very good, and I think it's good because it doesn't have a ton of information on it, but it does have very good information. If you look here, where'd it go? He's got 2 maps at the very beginning of his book. One is of the eastern part of the empire, and one is of the west. And I was thinking I'd go ahead and scan these and probably put them up on the portal. So this is page 25 and 26 if you have the book. But it shows you, you know, the salient places that we'll need to remember or look at on the eastern end of the Roman Empire and then the western side of the Roman Empire. Now, it really is divided up like that too. Alexander pretty much won the eastern half of the empire for Rome. Because he takes it over, he leaves it to his generals, and his generals, because they're too busy fighting each other, they weaken each other to the point where Rome will eventually be able to come in and just sweep the place. Rome is a juggernaut in these days. But the Roman Republic was much smaller, and the Roman Republic lasts for hundreds of years, from about 509 to about 27 BC. Now, when I say it's a republic, understand this. This is before any empire happens. And when I tell you that the prequels for Star Wars were based somewhat loosely on the Roman Empire, they most certainly were. The Clone War, the Emperor taking over and all that. Of course, it's a little bit more nefarious in the case of the Star Wars, but anyway. So we have the Roman Republic, 509 to 27 BC. Now, Rome, when it was very first founded, it had kings, but then came to hate the idea of having kings. And for almost 500 years, was governed as a republic. No kings, but the republic was a representative republic. Now, it wasn't something like, we vote Senator so-and-so in. No, there were senators, and the senators were aristocratic elites. But they were a class, and so nobody could move up to the Senate. They were born into it, right? So while it was representative, it wasn't really representative. Like, they didn't go ask you an opinion poll, okay? They governed based on what they thought would be best. Of course, that probably had some of their own self-interest in there as well. But Rome prided itself on being a republic. Okay, there was a saying SPQR. Who knows what that is? SPQR. What is it? SPQR is it's a Latin phrase. Senatus.
I did it last semester.
Senatus Populusque Romanus. And this. Oh, I misspelled Populusque. SPQR. Senatus Populusque Romanus. It means the Senate and the people of Rome. Notice it doesn't say anything about an emperor in there. And you would see them flying their banner SPQR. I would say SPQR in there because they use the Latin alphabet, and that's what we use. SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romano. They were Republican, and they were very proud of the fact that they hated the idea of a king. But this particular republic got very bloated. This might sound very familiar. Got bloated and lazy and started to go into decline. And what was needed was a strong hand to govern. At this time, there was a series of little civil wars, and one of the generals that gained popularity during this time was a guy by the name of Julius Caesar. Yeah. A guy by the name of Julius Caesar. Have you ever heard of him? He was a Roman general, and Julius Caesar, when he was very much one of these guys like Alexander was. He was very, very ambitious, very intelligent, very well connected. And he would go into battle and get things done. But one time, Julius Caesar gets kidnapped by pirates. He gets kidnapped. I'm just saying that he gets kidnapped by pirates. When the Senate offers his ransom, pays his ransom, he goes back to the Senate, and as the general, establishes the Roman Navy and destroys every pirate in the entire Mediterranean. Like, sweeps the Mediterranean and keeps it, for the rest of his life, keeps it clear of piracy. Like, it was absolutely brutal and ruthless against them. That's one of the things that he did, and guess that, and you can imagine, that made him very popular with shipping people, because, yeah, this guy gets things done. And when he, I forget the age whatever age Alexander dies at, Julius Caesar gets to that age and he cries because he hasn't conquered as much as Alexander did. Like, he's trying to compete against Alexander the Great. But that's Julius Caesar. And he's very, very popular. And he starts to bring order to this dysfunctional, this dysfunctional republic. He becomes a very, very popular guy. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of talk about making him the emperor. And that makes a lot of people very unhappy and very nervous. Two people in particular that it made unhappy and nervous were two of Julius Caesar's best friends. A guy by the name of Brutus and another guy by the name of Cassius. And Brutus and Cassius, they're senators and they're very close to Julius Caesar. One thing leads to another, and I'm sure that you might have heard of the story. If you read Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, it'll be there. If you want to read it there, a sort of dramatized account. But Julius Caesar is murdered by his very best friend. Have you ever heard the phrase "et tu, Brute"?
And fall Caesar,
What's that?
and fall Caesar.
Yeah. Et tu, Brute means "and you also, Brutus," because Brutus was his friend and he was stabbing him. He was stabbed, I forget how many times, 70 times or something like that, and bled to death on the floor of the Senate. He was assassinated. Well, that, as you may well think about what would happen if a very popular political figure in America got assassinated. Yeah, that could have happened. Well, as you may well expect, their civil wars just start popping up. People fighting, like before it was people who were the pro-Republicans and people who were the hey, let's make Julius Caesar the emperor. And they're fighting, they were a war of words, but when Julius is killed, then blood starts to run in the streets. People start getting violent and these factions begin fighting one another. Not only do we have those two factions fighting one another, but we also have other people who are vying to take the place, the popularity that Julius Caesar inhabited. And so this fighting goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it results in a nephew of Julius sort of rising to the top, but not all the way to the top. His name is Octavius. And Octavius pretty much comes out on top, but he's challenged by a couple, actually, Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And that starts a civil war. And those two factions are almost equally matched. Octavius on the one side, Mark Antony and Cleopatra on the other side, and they're fighting. Well, the war looks like it's going to go against Octavius. And there's another guy by the name of Herod the Great is what history remembers him as, who comes in and says, I'll help you out, Octavius. And he helps Octavius. He was actually on the other side first, but he switches sides and they defeat Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So Mark Antony and Cleopatra die. You know the story of Cleopatra hugs snakes, right? Who knows that? Asps, yeah, and she kills herself. But after Mark Antony suffers the defeat and gets killed. So,
Not very cuddly, but.
No, doesn't keep you warm at night. Octavius comes out on top. His enemies are vanquished, and he ascends to the head of the Senate. And at first, they believe that he's going to be restoring the republic. Well, at the end of the day, he rules so well. He's a young guy. He's still kind of a ruthless guy, but he does rule very, very well. And they give him They give him the name. Well, here we go. I got out of line there. He becomes emperor in 27 BC, and they give him the name Augustus. And so history remembers him as Augustus Caesar, which you will find that name in Luke chapter 1. Because Augustus was the one who sent out for a census that God used providentially to get Mary and Joseph back to Bethlehem, so that baby Jesus can be born there.
World should be taxed.
Yes, the world should be taxed. So it was because of a tax. God used a tax in order to accomplish his purpose in history, and have Christ born in Bethlehem. So, while we're fighting taxes out there, and while we're fighting abominations out there, just keep in mind, God uses those things sometimes. Those things they think they're so autonomous. God uses those things to accomplish his purpose. What do we got on time? Okay. I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit. So he's given the title Augustus in 27 BC. He becomes emperor, and he lays his enemies low. But he becomes a very good emperor. He was brutal for a pagan. I mean, obviously, he's not a righteous ruler, but he administratively is excellent. He does some very, very good things. He unites the empire, and he brings them in. He rules for something like 40, 45 years, something like that. He rules, and rules very well. He's not one of the tyrants that I mean, he starts out as a tyrant, but he's not like a Caligula or a Nero or somebody like that, somebody who's just insane. He's a very intelligent, brilliant guy who rules overall, for a pagan, he rules pretty justly. Now, so that's that. Now I want to show this map here. This is a map of, wait a minute, do that. I'll get back to the map. The map there is a map of Israel during the time of Christ. Now I'm going to put it up there because this is what I want to show is sort of the political reality. Clearly the people don't remain in power all the time, but I do want to show you the political reality of that. There we go. All right, get back on there. Okay. So what you see in the middle there, that big yellow section, it says Samaria, Judea. That particular district is governed by a Roman governor, what's known as a procurator. And in Jesus' day, who was the procurator in his day?
Herod.
No, Herod was a king.
Oh, Pilate.
Yeah, Pontius Pilate. So Pilate governs this area. Now, Herod, we have a different Herod. So we have Herod Antipater, who was the Herod the Great that was there during the birth of Jesus that killed all the babies in Bethlehem. And then his son, Herod Antipas. Now, in Herod Antipater's day, Herod Antipater governed all of this. But once he died, they were like, well, you know what? He might have a little too much power. And Antipas was not the same kind of ruler. He was not nearly as good. He was more of a sensual guy. He loved his riches, he loved his pleasure and all this sort of thing. So the Romans give him a little area over here that we might call Galilee, right? So he governs that. And down here in Perea, he governs that as well. So he has a couple of different territories that he's able to govern. Up here, we have this ruled by Philip. Now you remember Philip. Philip also was a child of Herod the Great. You remember that Herod Antipas, or John the Baptist, loses his head because he goes to Herod Antipas and tells him it is not lawful for you to have your brother Philip's wife. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. I saw your hand, sorry. So that's governed by Philip. And then we have some other areas here that we see mentioned: Phoenicia, Decapolis, and then Philistia is down here. But that's the political reality of the day. This was ruled by a Roman governor. This was ruled by basically a puppet king. And eventually, after Jesus died, Herod Antipas gets kicked out of his place of power too. So that happens. But that is sort of the area this is the political reality of that area. So when Jesus comes to Jerusalem and they're going to crucify him, Herod happened to be in Jerusalem. Remember, you read that, and Herod actually is the ruler of where Jesus is from. He's from Galilee up here, and so Pilate says, "Hey, give him to Herod. That's one of his subjects." And Herod's like, "Yeah, well, it happened in your region." So they're arguing about who's going to pass judgment on it. Anyway, but those are the political reality. That's the political reality of the area in Jesus' day. Well, let's talk a little bit about religious influences in the Roman Empire. Now, this is going to come into play, especially as we understand. Well, you'll hear atheists argue about this with Christians as well. This is going to come into play with, especially as the church goes out and encounters these religions. There will be a war of gods. Okay, the pagan gods versus the one true living God. I mean, we know who wins, but there's that tension though. So some of the major religious influences, you've got the Greco-Roman pantheon, people like Zeus and Athena and Apollo. These are gods that the Greeks worship. Although you know that the Greeks and the Romans have a very they have an intellectual pedigree going all the way back to people like, Plato and Aristotle